You checking in with Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, and you're tuning into Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dale Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, is being brought to you by BetOnline, Athletic Greens, Aura, Mint Mobile, and Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, week 1 of training camp officially in the books. You and I were out there on day 1 on the player side of the field. And throughout the last couple of days, I guess the biggest thing that both you and I have noticed and what we have noticed from afar is that the intensity for these practices has ramped up quite a bit in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yes. Yes.
This is what training camp's about. This is about seeing these guys go at it and ramp up intensity, like you said, and you start to see some things shine through. And so day 3 in the books for camp takeaways. Next one that the Chargers fans will see will be with the team in pads. I'll be there covering it live. But today's episode, all about day 3 takeaways, maybe some key themes to kind of take into week 2. We're going to talk about Justin Herbert's clinic. We're going to talk about Asante Samuel Jr. kind of punching back at some of the themes that we've seen so far from some of the analysts, if you will. We're going to talk about Quentin Johnston and Keenan Allen still balling. Some previews on maybe some more innovation on offensive scheme from Kellen Moore. We'll talk about a lot of things here. Bunch of takeaways, as well as some things that Brandon Staley has said about the offensive line, as well as just overall exceptionalism from both sides of the ball. But Jake, before we get to that, let's pay the bills. Let's give the fans 47 seconds to learn about why they should switch to Mint Mobile. They get $15 a month for premium, wireless, unlimited data. And they get to hang out with Ryan Reynolds, essentially, with his new company that he is part founder of. Let's talk about Mint Mobile for 47 seconds. And we'll be right back to talk about week 1, day 3 recap.
If you've ever thought, why in the world is my wireless bill so damn high? Then let me tell you about our friends over at Mint Mobile who we're partnering with for today's video. Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for as low as $15 a month, and you don't have to sacrifice any coverage, speed, or data. They're built on the nation's largest 5G network, so they keep costs low by selling directly to you online. They cut out the retail stores and the salespeople. All Mint Mobile plans include unlimited nationwide talk and text, plus lightning-fast 5G and free mobile hotspot. So why should you have to pay for more than you have to access the same network? It only takes 15 minutes to switch, and you'll be paying as low as $15 a month for your phone plan. It really is that simple. So use the link in the description below. Try mintmobile.com/Chargers Unleashed to get started. Click the link in the description below or scan the QR code.
Jake Hefner, day 3 in the books. Let's go off the top. Biggest takeaways from day 3 in your mind are?
You touched on day 1, just having J.C. Jackson out there, and what you're kind of seeing is now the ramp up process that Brandon Staley has been talking about since he was out there. He participated in his first 11-on-11 drills yesterday, which was good to see. And as Staley said on day 1 of practice, he's not ready to actually play in a game yet, but they have a plan for him in order over these next several weeks to get him to that point. So the hard part, essentially getting him ready for training camp, looks like it's in the rearview mirror right now. Now it's just getting him back to game speed, it looks like, is the main goal here. Dan, both sides of the field after day 1, which you and I both thought the offense clearly got the better of the defense from the get-go. The last 2 days, it seems like it's been much more competitive. The defense started getting their turnovers, their pass breakups, their sacks on day 2. It continued into day 3, most notably by Asante Samuel Jr. with a pick 6. But it's been a pretty even competition these last 2 days. One side has not really outshined the other because you have the offense that will get some passes, some deep throws from Justin Herbert. The defense will respond, and then the offense will come back once again. And it seems just like a trading of heavyweights, if you will. And so I don't remember this early in a camp that type of competitiveness happening this early. Like traditionally what we have seen from training camp is that the defense starts to win early. The offense has caught up. That's what we have seen these last 2 years under Joe Lombardi and that type of training camp that was run by Brandon Staley. Now it seems like the wheels are hitting the ground a lot earlier than we have traditionally seen. So it's really good to see this level of competition this early in camp.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Jake, because I think what we've seen previously is it seemed like it would be on a day-to-day basis. Like on one day, you see the offense just killing the defense, and on another day, you see the defense winning. Whereas now you're seeing them at the same time punch back on the same day. And so there isn't necessarily as much of the offense won this day or defense won this day. And that's what you want. And I think that shows kind of continuity and ramp up kind of at the same level on both sides. And that points to the success so far of a Derek Ansley and a Kellen Moore and Brandon Staley kind of bringing this whole thing together. So I agree with you. The heavyweight battle, so to speak, is pretty impressive. Another takeaway for me, Jake, I thought that's big is we all know Justin Herbert is Justin Herbert, but to see how dialed in Justin Herbert is through 3 days of camp with the new throwing mechanic that people have talked about, with new receivers and playmakers in play, the dimes that he throws, even with the Asante Samuel Jr. interception, which again, like if you count the number of touchdown passes and amazing plays Justin Herbert has had so far during camp, he's had one interception. Like extrapolate that out to a season, 15 touchdowns, one interception, like you'll take that. So like,
it was a great interception by Asante Samuel Jr.
Yes, shout out. And he should have had 2 interceptions yesterday, to be
It's
honest.
a hell of an interception.
Yes, but the level of skill that you're seeing from Justin Herbert and just the ease in which he makes it look is just like, it gets you excited for what you can see in this Kellen Moore offense. And then tailoring on top of that is just the guys he's throwing to are just rewarding him constantly. And you're seeing yesterday, day 3, you saw Mike Williams, you saw Keenan Allen with an incredible catch, like in the air. You saw Quentin Johnston floating with one of his catches. You saw kind of a toe drag swag from Quentin Johnston. John Hightower again rewarding him. You're seeing a lot of guys making these decisions from Justin Herbert deem successful. And so when you see that early, and obviously Justin Herbert, I think, trusts his receivers, but I think trusting his receivers when maybe Justin Herbert wouldn't necessarily do that himself, that's when you start to see some gold. And so just the overall Justin Herbert clinic, but Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston, John Hightower, Derius Davis, all these guys rewarding him for some of the deeper throws that may be a little bit less of a success rate in normal times. That was huge to me. And Keenan Allen even talked about it in his press conference where he's like, somebody asked him, I'm paraphrasing, like, oh, like, was it like, it seems like you're looking pretty good out there. He's like, yeah, I'm a good receiver, obviously. And then when you have Justin Herbert throwing to me, it just looks different. And, that tandem, Keenan Allen, by the way, Jake, this is the best I have seen him look in camp in years.
On fire.
And he talks about how he's just run all offseason to kind of prepare for the season. He looks excellent. And seeing him downfield, like, oh, chills.
I want to highlight that real quick, Dan, because there was a message that was said by Kellen Moore earlier this week, and we talked about it on the show when this quote was said, but it really resonated with me, and I think that message has still continued through these last few days of training camp, is that he was asked about wide receiver 3, essentially, and everybody will just, in their heads, say, okay, that's between Joshua Palmer and Quentin Johnston. His response, I think, was so perfect in this circumstance, where he says, we have 4 starting caliber wide receivers. Don't talk to me about wide receiver 3. I'm not going to pigeonhole anything here. We have 4 starting caliber wide receivers. And the fact that you have seen this amount of volume goes into what you were saying in terms of Justin Herbert and his trust with the wide receivers. Quentin Johnston getting involved very, very early in camp. Keenan Allen just doing Keenan Allen-like things. Mike Williams now essentially being utilized in the slot, also making deep plays. And Joshua Palmer getting back into the action yesterday during camp, being very, very aggressive. Like you said, I can't remember that many offensive weapons. And hell, John Hightower, who essentially could make a very good argument for wide receiver 6 by the end of training camp, because he is the one that has stepped up the most. And in terms of the best speed replacement for while Jalen Guyton is currently out, that's probably your next best option for a guy who has 4.4 speed. But to see this many wide receivers get involved this early in camp and to see like this next level of trust and evolution from Justin Herbert in this offense, everything that Kellen Moore has basically said as far as what he wants to instill in this offense. And again, I know we're watching non-padded practices here, but the signs of that coming to fruition have been very telling early on.
And Jake, I want listeners and viewers to remember like what they've seen the last few years. Like if you close your eyes and you go back to 2021, 2022, and Justin Herbert throws deep too, you know where that sentence ends. That's going to be Mike Williams almost every time, unless Jalen Guyton was healthy. Now you're hearing Justin Herbert throws deep too, and like you've heard 6 names many times. That's the mark of a lethal and a successful offense, is when you can't predict how the sentence ends. And that's what Kellen Moore is bringing. You brought up Asante Samuel Jr. He didn't have a perfect day. He gave up a few third down conversions, but the splash plays were there. And there's a lot to be said about Ja'Sir Taylor versus Asante Samuel Jr. And Jake, you and I both said this competition is healthy for this group. I have been on record. I just don't see how Asante Samuel Jr. loses that battle, if there is a battle, to Ja'Sir Taylor. And through 3 days of camp, I know it's early, but through 3 days of camp, if you just use those 3 days, Asante Samuel Jr. is won.
Yes.
There's no question. For Chargers fans, go back and look at the highlights of the deep throws that have been completed and look how many times they have been on Ja'Sir Taylor. Now, are they putting Ja'Sir Taylor in situations that make him uncomfortable and maybe that will make him better by the time the season starts? 100%. And padded practice is very different because that's where Ja'Sir Taylor is a more physical corner than Asante Samuel Jr., so maybe things will change. But as of right now, Asante Samuel Jr. is reminding people of who he is and where he left off last season.
Yeah, Dan, we talked about this in general gameplay, and even from a small sample size for Ja'Sir Taylor. Both he and Asante Samuel Jr. have their strengths and weaknesses in terms of what they are good at in terms of where they thrive on defense. But yeah, this whole Ja'Sir Taylor versus ASJ rhetoric that we had heard leading up to training camp, it would seem right now that Asante Samuel Jr. has a leg up on that competition. And he has looked really, really good. Yes, like you said, not flawless, but really, really good through 3 days of practice. Making a great interception, by the way. I want to make that emphatic. That is not an easy interception that he made on Justin Herbert yesterday. He really had to make it somewhat of an adjustment in midair just to get that ball and take it back to the end zone. But
from the slot, by the way.
From the slot. But I love this competition. Regardless of what people want to say, if Ja'Sir Taylor is the one that's, being on the wrong side of long catches or in the flat movements and just getting burned by opposing wide receivers, for a second-year, 6th-round pick, I will take that as development.
And they're letting him do that, which I think shows a lot.
Yes. So, again, I think this is still part of Brandon Staley and Derek Ansley's plan in terms of the rotation that you are eventually going to see between these 4 quarterbacks, between J.C. Jackson, Michael Davis, ASJ, and Ja'Sir Taylor. And I think in general, it's going to make this group more versatile. It's going to be able to disguise coverages better to opposing offenses. Again, regardless of the results that we are seeing in training camp, I see no downfall in anything that is happening out there. None whatsoever.
I agree. And one other one that you touched on briefly was Mike Williams in the slot. Daniel Popper put out an article kind of talking about this and highlighting the uniqueness of this. According to Daniel Popper, who took some data from the last few years, 13% of Mike Williams' snaps over the last 2 seasons have come from the slot. 13. And you're starting to see, you've heard Brandon Staley and Chris Beatty talk about, the wide receiver coach, talk about, like, they see Mike Williams as a complete receiver, and they're kind of unlocking the things and tools that he can have, that he brings to the table that maybe he hasn't shown in previous regimes. And so, Chris B talked about, he can be the Michael Thomas. And now they're starting to put Mike Williams in the slot more, and they're actually showcasing that in training camp. And Keenan Allen was asked about this. Like, what does Mike Williams in the slot mean for you? And it's hilarious. He's like, oh, maybe he'll get double teamed every once in a while, and I can have single coverage.
Yeah, give me a break. What are these?
Which is hilarious. How many times Keenan Allen is double teamed and still is wide open. So imagine him in single coverage, which is what you're starting to see in camp on the outside, where Keenan Allen is just looking silly in a good way. Having those successes of Mike Williams in the slot, downfield catches from Mike Williams from the slot, that's a big change schematically for this offense. And so you pair that slot movement for Mike Williams with the Quentin Johnston addition and the tool set that he brings, whether it's that yak from drag routes or just the toe drag swag stuff you see, athleticism on the sidelines, deep down the field, the breakaway speed that Quentin Johnston brings. Oh, and Derius Davis now getting more into the mix. By the way, you have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, still Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. You have Justin Herbert throwing to them. Haven't even talked about Gerald Everett. Haven't talked about the very tall
Dawn upon him.
There we go. Sorry, I'm all in my feelings over here. Haven't talked about Josh Palmer. Haven't talked about Jalen Guyton. Haven't talked about Austin Eckler. Like, that's a lot of dudes that are making plays for him already. That's exciting. And again, we are doing our best to temper expectations, to temper our excitement. And we would say so if there were things that were like, oh, snap, that's not good. But so far, and Jake, I'll ask you this. So far, through 3 days, on field with your eyes, have you been this excited or have you been this impressed since Staley has been the head coach of this team? Or when's the last time you were this impressed?
Can't remember. Honestly, I can't remember. And this kind of harkens back to my criticism on Brandon Staley, but also my encouragement for believing that he is learning year by year. And with Kellen Moore now part of this coaching staff, I think that he has an idea of how the best way possible to run his training camp, exactly what it is that he wants to accomplish. I think you saw that a lot from Staley learning the right pieces to place around him. We are already seeing early indications of that with Kellen Moore. Hell, let's look back to last year in general, just in the acquisition of what Ryan Fitkin brought to the special teams unit and how differently those drills are handled in practice.
In one season.
Now look at what it is with Kellen Moore and the type of involvement, the next evolution, if you will, of Justin Herbert. And great word that you said, Dan, was trust. It kind of brought me back a little bit to, and I know this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but in the same realm, is the way that Phillip Rivers used to trust his receivers. It would not matter who the hell the name was on the back of it. Mm-hmm. And I'm reminded of when Denario Alexander was literally picked up mid-season. And in his first game, Phillip Rivers chucked him a deep ball touchdown. And it was like, hello, nice to see you. Welcome to the team. It's giving me those type of vibes for when you're seeing rookie wide receivers like Quentin Johnston this involved, when you're seeing different things schematically, like Mike Williams utilized in the slot, the amount of mismatches that is going to cause opposing defenses. When you're seeing Davis getting involved in this offense early. Derius Davis, excuse me. Yes. I'm excited about how these tight ends are going to be utilized in this circumstance. Again, it's just one layer on top of another, trying to build the best version and weapons possible for Justin Herbert. And so this is Brandon Staley, I think, taking that next step, even if we're just talking training camp here. This is where it starts, and this is what's going to be the message that's going to carry forth throughout the entire season.
Yeah, and you're seeing glimpses of the other Davis, Mike Davis, also looking good with a few pass breakups on day 3. And so you've seen pass breakups from Asante Samuel Jr., from Mike Davis,
Alohi
Gilman, from J.C. Jackson, obviously Derwin James. Things are kind of coming together. And it's so dang hard to not get in your feelings and just like, oh, Super Bowl, here we come. But it's, among anything else, it's just refreshing to see that the hype and the ideology of what we possibly could get from Kellen Moore when he was brought into this team months ago actually come to fruition. And you can't help but be excited and happy for Justin Herbert and some of the guys on this offense who they probably wouldn't say it publicly, but know what they were limited with previously. And to now be, Justin Herbert talked about being free and all that kind of stuff with his new contract. I kind of extrapolate that out to the whole offense being free now with the Kellen Moore scheme brought in. And so it's just cool to see the team. And a lot of folks talked about, I think Austin Eckler talked about, like how the vibe was just different this year and everyone's excited and it's just focused on ball and there's different energy. When Kellen Moore was brought in, Brandon Staley, I think there's a piece by Albert Breer, and there's a piece that he touched on how philosophically Brandon Staley was excited to have Kellen Moore because he aligns philosophically with how he runs his offense, with how Brandon Staley likes to run his defense. He didn't say this, but Joe Lombardi's offense philosophically did not align with what Brandon Staley wants to do. When you can bring that alignment and bring that aggressiveness on both sides of the ball, because we were clamoring for this offense to be aggressive. And if that's the one thing that changes is play calling aggression, this offense will be transformed. And there's a whole bunch more that's going to be changing with Kellen Moore. But if they just change aggression, they're in a good spot. So that's what gets a lot of fans excited. You're seeing so many people that are at camp talk about how different this offseason looks and this training camp looks. So Chargers fans, I know we've all been burned by this is the year. And, the preseason hype and the preseason champs. Go watch a training camp with your eyes in person and you'll tell the difference. So it's an exciting time, Jake. And we went through a whole bunch kind of rapid fire. Any other kind of main takeaways from today?
Yeah.
Or yesterday.
Yesterday. We're going to get a much better assessment of the trenches tomorrow, Dan, when you're out there on the field. But Staley had a lot of interesting comments to say about the offensive line and his excitement about this starting five. Now, we had Rashawn Slater on the show just after day one of the first practice of training camp. And you could tell the excitement that he had with not only some of his new running mates that he has next to him and Zion Johnson, praised a lot of the work of Jamari Sawyer stepping in for him at left tackle last year. But Dan, there was some quotes yesterday just in terms of what Brandon Staley said with this new look offensive line. And, nothing out of the ordinary. These seem like pretty generic comments you would hear from any offensive line, but he had basically was asked about the mix and experience between them and how that is ultimately going to favor them this season. And his response was, starting five has had really good chemistry together. That's exciting for us. You've seen Rashawn Slater out there the first 3 days. He looks really good. He had a really good offseason. The two young guards, the amount of experience that they were able to get last year, I think that really gives us an advantage. Again, highlighting Zion Johnson and Jamari Sawyer. I know it was reported yesterday that Trey Pipkins had I believe it was just a leg tweak during individual drills, not during team drills, but individual drills. And he was only held out for a precaution. So we'll keep an eye out to see if he is out there on the field tomorrow with pads. But just in general, Dan, I want to highlight this offensive line one more time. Justin Herbert hasn't had an offensive line that looks like this since he's been with the Chargers. And you can go back to his rookie season where it was well noted at that point in time, that was before Rashawn Slater was here, how bad that offensive line was. And then it got a little bit better. And then it got a little bit better when Rashawn Slater came here. And then when Zion Johnson and Jamari Sawyer came here. And you could see this organization now reinvesting in the offensive line. And now you have a very good mix of youth, veterans, and overall experience. And I tweeted out, seeing Trey Pipkins and Jamari Sawyer stand next to one another on the right side of the offensive line just looks abnormal. It just looks abnormal. And you just think those dudes, just those two guys, should be winning a lot of battles in the trenches. But how important is this offensive line? Ultimately, we know that means everything when it relates to pass protection, run blocking, and how much this is going to be a catalyst in Kellen Moore's scheme. But Dan, what do you take away from that, just as far as, I know we haven't seen anything in pads yet. That comes tomorrow. But what the expectations are for this offensive line?
Brandon Staley talked about this. 1 through 5, like, the offensive line is tremendous. But what Brandon Staley is probably seemingly more excited about is the offensive line 6 through 10, the depth of the offensive line. And he highlighted guys like Will Clapp and Foster Terrell, the guys who've had like a much better camp this season. That's what gets me energized, because as a Chargers, covering the team, you brace for when something goes wrong and when someone goes down. And that's usually when blank hits the fan. But if it doesn't hit the fan, and that starting 5 is out there, that's a lot of beef. Like, the big beauties look wonderful. And it's abnormally beautiful to see the protection that Justin Herbert has. And I picked up on something you said, Jake. You said Justin Herbert hasn't had an offensive line like this since being with a team. That phrase, Justin Herbert hasn't had a blank since being with a team. Justin Herbert hasn't had an offensive line like this since being with a team. Hasn't had the weapons like this since being on the team. Hasn't had an offensive coordinator like this since being with a team. Hasn't had speed like this since being with the team. That's crazy. Like, it's just wild how, unleashed, uncorked Justin Herbert can be this year. And so lots of excitement on offense, offensive line, protection, running game. You haven't even gotten to see. That's where maybe we'll see more come time with pads, with Austin Eckler and company, Isaiah Spiller, Joshua Kelly. What are they going to be able to do? On the other side of it, though, Eric Kendricks was on the podium and talked about, him still kind of gaining speed, kind of getting up to speed with the playbook, and everybody out there making plays. Deion Henley had a good pass breakup yesterday. But there was some wildly high praise from Kendricks about Kenneth Murray, both physically, kind of athletically. Talked about kind of him kind of picking up the system, talked about him being able to use his instincts and how gifted he is, and him kind of bullish on Kenneth Murray. Now, is that Eric Kendricks, the leader, trying to bring up his boy who also loves cars? I don't know. But Eric Kendricks knows a thing or two. And Eric Kendricks seems to think that Kenneth Murray has progressed, and the years that Kenneth Murray has been on this team have been invaluable in getting to where he is today. Could we see an unleashed Kenneth Murray? Could we see Kenneth Murray who runs downhill aggressively, makes plays, right angles? You talked about Kenneth Murray being fantastic in coverage, which I think a lot of folks heard that. They were like, wait, which Kenneth Murray are we talking about? But talk that talk, EK. If we can get Kenneth Murray to be the guy you're talking about, this defense is loaded.
And I want to once again highlight what Chargers linebackers coach said just prior to training camp. Remember what his goal was? I want to have 2, not 1. I want to have 2 star caliber linebackers as part of this defense. And when you have Eric Kendricks talking like this about Kenneth Murray, now what we all kind of expected was that progressively and naturally that the presence of Eric Kendricks was going to either rub off or indirectly make Kenneth Murray a better player out there in the field. They were going to feed off of one another. And it's obviously nice to hear these type of indications very early. And for Kenneth Murray now going into his 4th season, he still hasn't quite gotten to that point that we had all expected to see from him after being drafted in 2020. But first of all, again, you made the highlight of Deion Henley in all of this, and everybody talking about, hell, we've talked about it, the possible competition between him and Kenneth Murray. When does that start, if it starts at all, depending on how the play goes? But I like how Eric Kendricks basically said, I have not played with a linebacker that physically is built like Kenneth Murray. Highlighted his size, highlighted his speed, which obviously is what he made a name for himself in college for, it to be that physically gifted. Now you just have to win the mental battles out there for him. Eric Kendricks knows the mentality as far as what it takes to play. So yes, it's obviously nice to hear that type of praise this early on. We'll see how that ultimately develops over the next several weeks. But if you combine that with the overall goals of what this linebacking group has, if you can bring that piece of Kenneth Murray out, it's huge for this defense of what you could have out there playing on the field.
100%. Which is what makes this next week so critical. This is where guys like Eric Kendricks, Kenneth Murray, Deion Henley, the running backs, the offensive line, defensive line, this is their time. Now that they can start getting more physical. Training camp week 2 is upon us. Week 1 is in the books. Lots of takeaways, lots of key themes. More than anything else, I think it just gives optimism and hope and excitement for this fan base, for the team, for the players, for the staff. Everything just seems rejuvenated and refreshed, which is all you can ask for, given how last year ended. And so excitement abounds as we continue. We will have you guys covered throughout training camp. Next week, again, I will be there live tomorrow for the padded version, the first padded version of Chargers training camp. We got you covered with recaps and takeaways from that as well. Jake Hefner, it's been fun. Week 1 in the books. Week 2 on the other side of the fence with you, man. Can't believe where we're at. The glow up has been so fun, and we're just getting started. Chargers Unleashed listeners, viewers, thank you so much for all that you do, all the support. By the way, we have a huge amount of giveaways coming up soon. Stay tuned, but we're just going to keep trying to level up on this thing. Big events, giveaways, special guests, all that stuff probably going to be announced here in the next week. Stay tuned for that. But until next time, Jake Hefner, you can find him at Jake D. Hefner, myself at Dan W. Sports. For Jake, Dan Wolkenstein, Chargers Unleashed, LA Football Network. Enjoy your weekend. Training camp week 2 starts tomorrow. We'll talk to you soon on the next Chargers Unleashed.